need a lot of protection. There's no question, we all have that feeling, even though many of us have lived in Eretz Yisrael for a long time, and a lot of these feelings that are today have been with us for many years, that we are always a little bit worried about what happens if I get on this bus, when we just learn to live with it. In a way that's good because it allows us to function, but in a way it makes us a little bit indifferent to a lot of the things which Hashem may want to have us be more aware of, which is that we are in a sakana. There may be a midas adin that Hashem is enacting now, which may be more than the norm, and therefore we should be on alert, as it were, on a personal level, for our own personal spiritual level, to be on a higher level to protect ourselves. So, as an example of that, I was just saying that I read in an article about somebody who was in an attack about a month ago, was stabbed 5 times, and he was very close to death. But he thanked someone later, and he said in the story how he'd had this whole debate with his Yetzer Hara the day before his sister's wedding, whether he should wear the nude tzitzis that were really allocated for his sister's wedding, or go without tzitzis at all that particular day, because he didn't have other tzitzis available. So he decided in the end, he realized it's his Yetzer Hara trying to get him to go walk without tzitzis, and tzitzis are actually a personal protection. Which, by the way, that we learned 2 things about how to fight the Yetzer Hara just from those 2 lines in his letter. Because on the one hand, he's saying to realize it's the Yetzer Hara talking to you. That's the big step, to realize that little logic is really not a proper logic. It's a facetious logic, fallacious logic. And to therefore be on, sometimes we want to do exactly the opposite of the Yetzer Hara. Once we realize it's the Yetzer Hara talking, that itself could give us the proper direction to go against that. But he also went one step further. He realized also that what the Yetzer Hara was trying to tell him don't do right now for reasons of keeping the tzitzis beautiful or whatever, which sounds like a mitzvah in and of itself, which he often does tell us that he's trying to convince us to do a mitzvah, then he said, no, but I actually need this for my own protection. And that's also one of the ways to fight against Yetzer Hara, which is very difficult usually because he's pulling us. He's not just telling us things, he's also pulling us. He has a power to pull us in a certain direction. He himself is a malach. The Yetzer Hara is a malach, so therefore he has a supernatural power which can make us feel like we're being pulled in a direction. So one of the ways to fight against that is to realize, hey, I lose my protection. I'm going to lose my protection. I need the protection right now. He made that last statement, which is the clincher for him, which means besides realizing it's the Yetzer Hara, and what he's saying is probably a wrong argument to begin with, but also he's trying to get me to be without my protection. If I fight against him, then I can gain more protection. Just the fact that he fight the Yetzer Hara is a protection. But he said what he wants to deprive me of is also something that can protect me, the tzitzis themselves. And in the story, we'll see that in a very practical way, that tzitzis actually did save his life. Because he says, in the minutes after I was stabbed, I waited for the paramedics, and they didn't come right away. Right? The paramedics did not arrive right away. He would have bled out. 5 times he was stabbed by this maniac, and he really would have. And actually, when I read the story right after it did say that the guy was very close to death. But he says, the tzitzis that enveloped me, which is interesting, because when we put on a talus, we make that bracha that envelops us, litatef, which is the same word in modern Hebrew for an envelope, matifah. Litatef is to put yourself in a kind of an envelope. And that's actually one of the things we're supposed to think of when you put on tzitzis. So he says the tzitzis that enveloped me were used by Hatzalah. So apparently the paramedics hadn't arrived, but Hatzalah had arrived. But apparently they didn't have everything. Like sometimes it's just a person who's nearby who gets a call. He doesn't always have with him the equipment. So he didn't really apparently have the equipment to make a tourniquet. He said they used the tzitzis themselves as a tourniquet for my stab wounds. And it says, despite his serious injuries, the brave Ben Ezra struggled with the terrorists, preventing him from attacking additional victims. So not only did he save his own life, was his own life miraculously saved, possibly through the spiritual struggle which he had already beat the Yetzer Hara with. Just like in the Parsha, when Esav is vanquished on a spiritual level, his Sar is vanquished, he's able to accomplish a spiritual dominion over Esav. Then the next day, even though he didn't just walk in without any effort, he gave gifts, and he came in a special way, presented himself to Esav in a special way, but still, it was almost like the victory was assured. And in a sense, maybe we could say in this same scenario where this fellow was fighting with his Yetzer Hara and overcome his Yetzer Hara, in a way, he probably already had created that spiritual force which allowed him to struggle and fight off the other, and not just for himself, but to help protect other people. He mamish prevented the fellow from attacking additional civilians, which agav, that can be very dangerous. A good friend of ours just passed away, who was involved in the Har Nof a year ago, Howard Chaim Rothman, Shem Shid Yimkom Damo, and he was one of the reasons he was more severely injured than others. Is because he dafka did try to go and be the front line and protect everyone else and let everyone else run away while he's fighting the Arab. So sometimes that person who's trying desperately to protect the others can endanger himself. And this fellow also, from the sound of it, he could have died because he put himself in harm's way, so to speak. But he said that because of this extra level of having more tzitz, it's just in a practical way, he had the thing. So he concluded the letter thanking the rabbi. He says, I am moved to tears from this help this rabbi gave him, and whatever, and he thanks him for the help this rabbi had given him and others. So I just think that in a way that this is a symbol to us that it should come out, even though it was a month ago, but they didn't come out with this article, this letter that he had written became well known this week. And I think it has a lot to do with the parsha that we're learning today. We want many things to protect us, to protect our family, to protect others, and we know that it used to be as simple as carrying a gun or carrying it, but today it doesn't help, because even IDF soldiers who are carrying all the weapons they can are getting stabbed and wounded. There's one who just at a gas station this week along the highway, and he got stabbed and unfortunately died. So we there's almost no way we can protect ourselves these days. They're running people over at bus stops. Who doesn't stand at a bus stop, right? And they're going out of the car. And the one who attacked people in Malta Yisrael, he got out of the car after he'd already run people over. That wasn't enough. He got out of the car with a hatchet and started bludgeoning people. And that's another thing that they do. First they run over, then they take out a knife. And even if we're trying as much as we can to avoid, there's very little when a person's willing to give up his life to stab anyone in his way. It's very, very hard. So we need a lot of protection. We need a lot of protection. Of course, Torah itself is the biggest protection. The more we learn Torah, the more we teach Torah. There's no question. But I think in this week's Parsha, apropos to the story, we see a lot of, Yaakov Avinu realized a big danger is on the horizon, right? He tried very much to placate Esau, which I wanted to talk about that as well. But in the end of the day, he realized that it's a spiritual fight, that he has to somehow overcome Esau on a spiritual level. And he did that. He fought all night with this malach, and according to the Midrash, the dust from this fight went all the way up to the Kisei HaKavod. Meaning this fight was something that affected the whole running of the world in a way. Because, of course, Esav and Yaakov represent major national movements in the history of the world. But on our own personal level, we learn from Yaakov Avinu. It says every time that one of the people at time in Tanoim would go to Rome, they would reread this parsha to learn how to deal with Esau. And Amalek came from Esau, and many people say that even though today we're talking about Arabs and not necessarily Amalek or Esau per se, but it seems to be a kind of a mixture today, because the whole idea of Amalek was he was willing to give up his life. It says he jumped into the hot burning mikveh and he cooled it down, meaning he allowed others to come in and attack Klal Yisrael. Until then, people were afraid to attack Klal Yisrael. In the old days, the Arabs themselves were afraid to attack us. The Arabs used to respect us. Arabs had derech eretz for Jews. Today, it's the complete opposite. And in certain respects, with the fact that they're willing to give up their life just to kill themselves, that's a very Amalek type of way of dealing with things, right? That he was willing to give up his own life, and the important thing is just to cool the bath down. So I get burnt in the process. So what? So that's a very Amalek way of thinking. And some people say that the Arabs today, in some sense, embody Amalek in some way. Somehow they absorbed some of the Amalek's tendencies. So this fight with Amalek, this fight with Esau, which early represents Amalek as well, I think it has a lot of lessons for us to learn. Now, besides the fact that we said you have to fight your Yetzer Hara, that itself can produce a tremendous protection, and the actual fight with the Yetzer Hara, the way you fight him, the way you push him off, the way you commit yourself, recommit yourself. It's interesting that when he originally sends a letter to, or a message to Esav, he says, "In Lavan Garti," the famous statement of Yaakov, "In Lavan Garti." That means I dwelt with Lavan. So why is he telling him that? So Rashi said the word Garti has a double meaning. First meaning is, he says, Lashon Ger. Ger is someone who's like a sojourner. Like when they went down to Mitzrayim, they told Paro, "We're just here, Lagur," not to stay for a long time. They did not intend to stay for a long time. Like we say in the Haggadah, Lo Lishtakea. A Ger is someone who's just sojourning there for a short time. So, in a way, it was like saying, Rashi says, I'm not an important person. I'm like a ger. I'm like a sojourner, that I didn't really become very important. In a sense, he's saying the brachas of father were not fulfilled in me, which is a very strange statement if you think about it. The brachas were mina shamayim. The brachas were from Hashem, really. And to say they weren't miskayim, what was he really saying? So it could be he was not denying Hashem or denying that the brachas had power, but rather I wasn't a proper recipient of these brachas, right? Because as he says in another place, that he was afraid that perhaps his averas had caused him to be unworthy for the brachas. So that's on one level. He said to Esav, don't think I'm anything chashuv. The brachas really weren't miskayim with me. Maybe you'll still be zoicha to the brachas. So that way, one way of placating him was not to flaunt himself. Even later, when he sent him all the gifts and so forth, it was in a humbling way. Like when he approached him, he prostrated himself. Everyone bowed down to Esav. There's a certain humility that we have to learn in dealing with our. But on the other hand, the other message that he sent with it was a very strong message. In Lavan Garti, he says, "Tarieg mitzvah shamarti," which is interesting because why would Esav be interested in that? But part of the Midrash says, for example, one of the things that Yaakov was afraid of is that Esav has a schus that he doesn't have. What schus does Esav have that he doesn't have? Kibud Aveim is one. Interestingly enough, according to the Midrash, is another thing that he felt, or it's another opinion, but both are probably true as well, that he was also afraid of the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael that he hadn't had for 22 years. Right? He had been away from his family for a long time, and he lacked the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, which is a big schus, right? So, and Esav had that. Esav had been living in Eretz Yisrael. He didn't go to Har Seir till much later. So, he was afraid of that schus. In other words, having a schus was something to be contended with. And Esav himself knew that. Esav himself knew that the brachas were important, which is really saying that spirituality is important. That spirituality can make a difference. Even though he was very far gone, but he was trying to convince his father to give him the brachas, so he knew they were very valuable. So basically, he could be giving him this message, but he could also just be saying it to himself. Sometimes we act humbly in order to placate people around us, but it can have a very debilitating effect, right? A person can look down on himself. The person just acts humbly all the time. In a sense, he feels incompetent, because that's really what humility is. I'm not really worthy. I'm not really anything. I'm a nothing, right? Like the famous joke they say about Navardik, and that was a very big thing in Navardik in Europe, that they worked on their humility. They dressed in very shabby clothing, and they, like when the Stipler was from Navardik, wanted to go on a date, he had to take the one suit that belonged to the yeshiva. Okay, so. And they had this, when they work on their humility, they would say, "Ich bin gornish," I'm a nothing. They had a famous joke that there was two Novardikers on a train, and then a third guy came into their compartment. In the old days you had a compartment. So they had the two Novardikers there, and then another Jew walked in, but he wasn't a Novardiker. And they started, after the trip started, they started, shuckling a bit and saying, "Ich bin gornish, ich bin gornish." And at the beginning he thought it was strange. And finally at the end of the trip, he started to grow on him. After 6 hours of hearing this, Ich bin Gornish business, he started to think maybe there's something to this, So then he started chuckling a bit, and then just before they got to destination, he finally worked up the courage to say Ich bin Gornish, right? And then the two other guys who've been chuckling the whole time saying Ich bin Gornish They stopped, they looked at him, they looked at each other and thought, and the one guy said to the other, he thinks he can be garnished in such a short time, right? You have to work on being garnished, right? So the joke is that garnished means I'm a nothing, right? I'm a nothing, but in a way that has a debilitating effect. The truth is they're right and he's right, right? You can right away say I'm nothing because we all know our own lacking, how the reality of who we are really on the inside. But on the other hand, they're right as well, that you have to do it in the right way. If you don't do it in the right way, it doesn't really mean a lot. So you have to know how to approach Hashem on that level. So I think here we have a good example. He said to Esav, I'm a nothing. The brachas were miskayim. That's a very dangerous way of looking at things. First of all, you have to have a emunah in Hashem properly. You can't let these things get to you. You can't let Esav get to you, right? So he said, the other meaning I have as well. Now, Esav may not have heard that because garti is a word. Who says he turned it around to mean tariyag? So who heard the tariyag of it? Who heard that he's keeping tariyag mitzvahs? At least Yaakov knew that. Yaakov on his inner panemius was thinking to himself, yes, I may be a garnished, but I'm a garnished that I have something to me, right? I have a backbone. I have an important central hub, which is called Tariag Mitzvos, that gives me my real meaning in life. That even if I don't have the brachas, but I have Tariag Mitzvah Shamarti, and Rashi adds that I didn't learn from Lavan at all. That's a very big strength that we have to go with. And even if we're not going to flaunt it on the outside, because on the outside we have to be humble to the people around us, and it helps us to be a proper human beings, to be humble, and even to deal with our enemies on some level, to be humble and to placate them, as we see in the parsha. But to know on the inside, Tariag Mitzvah Shamarti, I'm a very chashuv person, very, very chashuv person. I have Tariag Mitzvahs. That's something that's eternal, and that's something that's a direct connection to Hashem every minute of my life. And it means I'm not at all connected to Lavan and his shenanigans. I don't get pulled down by my surroundings. That's something we have to think. No matter what we do and we have to deal with our enemies, we have to know on the inside we're extremely chashuv, but not necessarily flaunt that. Another thing, Rashi says that we see from all the things that he did, sending the gifts and so on and so forth, dividing them up into two groups. And also, he davened to Hashem. Rashi says he prepared himself in 3 ways. Famous Rashi, right? Ladoron, gifts, tefillah, supplication to Hashem, and milchama. And some say that milchama means you have to be prepared to fight your enemy. But the truth is, the Ramban says, and Rashi could be interpreted that way also, that the whole thing was just to create a diversion so that at least 1/2 of Klal Yisrael will remain intact. No matter what happens, Rashi says the Sifsacham explains the Rashi that he was sure that the 1/2 will run away. How is he sure the other 1/2 will run away? Because I'm going to fight with him, not necessarily beat him, maybe I'll get beaten, but I'll create a diversion for the other half to run away. And the Ramban said that is really the main point of that Yaakov, not to fight Esav and beat Esav. He didn't really necessarily want to beat Esav. That's not necessarily our strength, is the military strength. But to create a way to make sure that no matter what happens, Klal Yisrael will survive. And the truth is, this is something we have to know no matter what happens, even though we all daven for each other. And I certainly hope all of you will remain strong and healthy, Admev Esrim. But the truth is, the main concern is Klal Yisrael. But on that level of Klal Yisrael, Hashem has always been looking out for us. So the famous story of the Mir Yeshiva, right, in which many others followed a similar path during the war, in miraculous ways that defy all logic. They survived. They survived as a whole yeshiva, which is incredible. So individuals have survived also with a lot of miracles and a lot of siyata d'shmaya, but to survive as an entire yeshiva. And when they got to Shanghai, for example, some guy had built a shul there, which didn't make any sense. A huge shul in Shanghai before the war. Who was it for? A few Jews living there, a few Reformed Jews or whatever. But here comes a whole yeshiva that, there's a whole shul waiting for you. Right? We're just waiting for them. And all sorts of hashgach. You read the books on how the Mir Yeshiva survived through the war in Shanghai and so forth. It's one nace after another. And there's different stories about why that happened. But one thing we know, that was always the yesod of Klal Yisrael's history. That no matter what happened, Hashem always provided for one part of us to survive intact. And That's also something that we have to know and to be strong in, but to concentrate mostly, I think, on the tefillah. I think that's something that I know I myself, it's something the Gemara says it has to be strengthened every single time we daven. It's so easy just to whip out the words. We've been saying them for many years, and it comes out of our mouth very easily, Baruch Hashem. For a lot of us who were Balei Tshuva, that was one of the problems in the beginning. We could hardly say the words, and then we're so proud of ourselves we can finally say the words, and then we don't even realize that eventually it gets to the point where we're so good at saying the words, they're just flowing out by themselves. Like even one of the Amoraim, I think it was Rava, who said, I have a lot of Hakar Satov to my head, that my head knows in the middle of Shemona Esrei to bow down at the right time. So I have such a Hakar Satov to my head. Baruch Hashem, my head knows when to bow down. But of course, on a certain level, he was making fun of this syndrome. I would call it the davening syndrome, that we just daven, right? It says, when you want to talk about learning a Gemara improperly, say, don't daven it up. Don't daven it up. As if davening means saying something without thinking. But that isn't really what davening means. I had a neighbor once who was a big Rav originally from Europe, and then he was in America. I call him big because he was a very special person. He wasn't that well known. But he once said to me that he felt the word davening. It's a very strange word. He knew all of Yiddish, so for him, I always just thought it was a Yiddish word. But he, knowing Yiddish, said it needs explanation, meaning he didn't feel it was such a simple word. And he thought, and it really stemmed back to an Aramaic expression, da'avunan. Da'avunan means of our forefathers. Of our forefathers. Da'avunan. That's what davening is. Davening is we're connecting ourselves back to our forefathers. Abram, like it says, Yaakov was afraid he missed the place where his forefathers davened. That's what we have to think. I'm like Yaakov Avinu, trying to save my nation, trying to save my family, trying to save myself. Look how we daven in the parsha. Just go through the words. It's electrifying. And when Avram daven, all the times we saw the Avram davening, even for Sodom, right? Tremendous strength in their davening. It's not something we should just daven up, right, as we say, but rather do it davuna. Do it as something, I'm connecting myself to the forefathers, to Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. When they connected to Hashem through tefillah, like it says, Hashem made them barren in order to get their tefillahs. Their tefillahs were so special. It's like, think of the greatest meal you've ever eaten. You have a taiva for that food. It says Hashem, Lahavdil, has a taiva for our tefillahs, but not the kind that's just davening it up. The kind that's davunan, the kind that's that kind of davening, davunan, of our forefathers, connecting us back to their way of davening. That's what Hashem has a taiva for. And if we stop ourselves, even just for a little bit during our davening, right before Shemona Esrei, before you just jump into it, stop and say, I'm trying to say something to Hashem. Just have a conversation with Hashem. I'm trying to get health. I'm trying to get all these things, and I'm talking to the boss, right? And certainly if I went to the manager of a bank, I would have a lot of kavanah when I walked in. If he knew I wasn't really having kavanah for what I'm saying, he would just kick me out of his office right away. So how does Hashem feel when he sees us just standing in front of him whipping off words? He doesn't, and this is the time especially, we read every day someone's getting stabbed, chas v'shalom, someone's getting run over. And these are young children, 18-year-old, 19-year-olds. Everyone says, this guy was so special. This one fellow, this American, Schwartz, I think his name was. He came to Eretz Yisrael Dafki. He said to one of the people in the school he came to, I want to connect to Hashem this year. Through the Chumash, he had a special effort. He especially focused on Chumash. And they said he was the most amazing. He would hug people. He would just hug people. He would meet you and hug you. That's what a special person. This person was cut down in the prime of his life. And this girl was killed the other day also. All these people, very special people in the prime of their life. What's going on? Ribono Shel Olam. This is what we have to think of before we jump into our Shemona Esrei. He prepared himself in three ways. Whatever we can do of what the Avos do to connect ourselves to the Avos, but especially to Tefillah. Da'avuna, don't daven, do da'avuna. Do something that connects you back to Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, the way they daven to Hashem. That Hashem had a taiva for their tefillahs, and hopefully, Bezrat Hashem, that should create a tremendous siyata d'shmaya, that we should have a siyum of all the sorrows, so we should have bias, Noel Tzedek, and Rabbi Me.
מכל החסדים ומכל האמת אשר עשית את עבדך לך, קטונתי מכל החסדים ומכל האמת אשר עשית את